Welcome, everyone, to the Resilience Hub and this, I think, profoundly important conversation about the relationship between indigenous knowledge, innovation, modern science, and technology. Are they two sides of the same coin? Are they dichotomous somehow? We're here with just extraordinary thought leaders and practitioners that really bring to life both the tensions and the harmony between these two ideas. And I'm so thrilled to have them with you, and I'll be introducing them shortly. My name is Sarah Farley. I'm Vice President at the Rockefeller Foundation. I lead our global portfolio on food systems, which includes our work in regenerative, agroecology, and indigenous food and traditional ecological knowledge systems. So this is a really salient topic that I feel very honored to sit among you and dissect. So I want to start with a quote, actually. An Albert Einstein quote. Well, this is credited to him. We may never know if he said it. "No amount of experimentation can ever prove me right, but a single experiment can prove me wrong." So often this idea of validating or legitimizing knowledge or invalidating or delegitimizing knowledge depends on where you sit. It depends on who you are, depends on your biases. For Western science, often we believe that the gold standard is peer review. It's scientific review. If possible, it's a randomized controlled trial. That is the holy grail. For indigenous communities, it means knowledge that withstands the test of time, knowledge that endures, that passes through generations, that is evidenced through empirical knowledge and lived experience. So, inspired by an amazing report that is just right at the intersection of these topics, which if you haven't read it and you're joining us in this conversation, you would find it, I think, really insightful. It's a report offered by the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, of which the Rockefeller Foundation is a member. And this report is called The Politics of Knowledge. And it opens with a recognition that this moment, right where we are, COP27, the politics of knowledge are at the very center of the debate on our future food systems. Where are they going? Whose voice matters? Whose sense of evidence and data points the way into where we're going? You know, with many key stakeholders, donors, scientists, policymakers, often still choose to distance themselves from indigenous knowledge if it is not codified and standardized into peer-reviewed knowledge. And so what that means is voicing skepticism around ideas of if food systems that look more traditional or indigenous have the capacity to feed all of humanity when we're at 9 billion, 10 billion people. It looks like calling into question the legitimacy of those lived experiences that suggest that living in balance between nature, planet, and people is not only possible, but was the standard way of living for many. And that is because I think on the surface, yes, we're contesting really important questions, but inside is really the political question of whose voice matters, who has power in these conversations. And so what we're going to do here on this panel is really start to unpack the balance, the polarity, perhaps the harmony between indigenous knowledge and codified, modern. There's so many adjectives. And actually, one of the things I'm hoping from this panel is to get a vocabulary to help us even frame the two sides and the spectrum, because the language really matters. And I do not suggest to have a clarity on that. So to help us work our way into this complex space, I'm joined by 6 extraordinary people and a virtual co-facilitator from WRI who will join us at the latter half of this experience. But to walk through our wonderful colleagues here, we have Josh Ampensam, founder of the greenafricayouth.org and climate program specialist in the UN Youth Envoy's office. He'll be setting some framing comments for us momentarily. We have Mete Rodriguez, director of Fundación Guatemala. We have Claudia Ringler, Deputy Director of Environment and Production Technology at IFPRI, part of the CG Center. We have Doreen, grassroots leader and program officer, the Shibuya Community Health Workers in Kenya. We have Deepak, who is joining us virtually, Doj Khadka, Vice President Asia of IDE Global, and Nikodeme Chamo, Regional NRM and Climate Change Advisor at USA. So much to work through. 3 big questions to anchor the conversation. The first, we're going to ask, what are your individual views on this seeming dichotomy between traditional and scientific innovation orientation? We'll also ask if such seemingly distinct views are compatible, and if so, how? And ultimately, I think we need to get to the big question lurking underneath these prior 2 questions, which is, what is at stake if we don't build a deeper attitude and appetite within our institutions to find the balance between indigenous knowledge and other forms of knowledge? So to kick us off and frame it up, I'm going to pass the microphone to Josh.
Thank you. So hello, everyone, and welcome again. I will share a very quick story, and I hope that helps us to start the conversation. In 2013, I was a bachelor student doing my undergraduate, and I've said this story probably a few times at COPS because people ask me, how did you get into activism? And this is how I got into activism. I was a student doing my bachelor program, reading environmental science at the University of Cape Coast, and I took a course that was titled Integrated Coastal Zone Management. And in the class, we learned a lot about solutions to coastal problems, mainly related to climate change. So that was the first time I heard the word climate change. And this was like 2013, so not so long ago. And when I heard that, what it made me think was the university was right on the coast. In the classroom, the professors had a lot of knowledge to share, a lot of solutions. But once you walk out of the university campus and you go to the beach, the pollution, the coastal erosion, the sun winning, everything was just as crazy as you could see it. And yet, within the university environment, all the solutions were discussed in the classroom. So at some point, I walked to my professor and asked, it seems like you should run for president or you should run for minister because you have a lot of the solutions. Why are we sitting in the classroom and talking about these solutions while the problem really exists and communities are suffering from it? And he said it's his job to give this knowledge to the students, and it's the students' responsibility to do something with it. As funny as it sounds, I said, okay, we will try to do something. So we went to communities and we started talking to them about everything we had heard in the classroom. And terminologies like climate mitigation, adaptation, resilience, circular economy, all these terminologies were terminologies we use in the classroom. So we would go out and we would try to communicate with people living in these communities around this. My academic performance wasn't great as a student, but being in classroom can also be boring, so you want to do something. What happened was that once we started going to communities and talking to them about these issues, what I realized was that they are already aware of everything that is being talked about. They have more practical examples to give than any of the examples we had in any of the books that we were using. More importantly, concepts like coping capacity, adaptive capacity were things that were everyday practical life that they are living, and we could get a bit more deep understanding of that when we were with them on the ground and having these conversations. Within the group of 7 people who started this student association and started working with communities to start mangrove restoration projects, organic composting and all of that, our academic performances improved significantly because we're able to come back to the classroom with everyday life experiences of the everyday person to these issues. What was more important was that I looked back at that time and actually realized that why am I even talking to these communities to understand these things? Because I grew up in a place where organic waste was something that automatically became compost that we used to farm. And I didn't need a concept like circular economy to tell me that. I realized that we know that when there are dry spells and when the rains are delayed, we need to, when we sow the seed, we need to cover it with the weed that we've cut off so that the sun and the heat doesn't touch the soil directly and the seeds are able to germinate while we wait for the rain to come. And I didn't need a terminology in a classroom to reinforce that to me as a solution. We realized that when there is higher rainfalls in places where the soil cannot absorb it, our parents will let us create mounds on the soil and put stone mounds as well to slow the speed of the water so that the soil can absorb more water and reduce the flow of the water. This was nothing that I needed a terminology to make me feel that this is actually something that I need to do. But yet, in the education system, it was made in a way that my thinking as a student and as someone who grew up with all these challenges and all these solutions, all of that was thrown away, and I have to really understand a definition, a terminology, who the author was, which year it was developed, a lot of nonsense to my perspective at some point. And my performance as an academic student only improved when I was able to bridge these two fields. A, lived experiences of myself and the other communities I was talking to, and B, realizing that there were gaps in terms of how much of this is right. Metrics for measurements, indicators, these were things that did not exist in the communities I live in. We just do them based on science, based on lessons, and sometimes we need to wait for my grandmom or my granddad to come and say, okay, now this is the time to start putting the weed on the soil after sowing because we don't think the rains are going to come. But there were no metrics around that. So for me, as someone who works on climate and work with communities and run a youth-led NGO, the key thing is that most of the framing that we have, which allow us to really put things into boxes so that we can really have metrics and indicators to measure them, are good for the measurement purposes. But we shouldn't forget that all the foundation for most of these things, if not everything, is based on things that we do naturally as humans, things that are part of our everyday life, and we shouldn't forget that. So I really hope that as we start this conversation, there is a role that science plays, but I think that fundamentally that role is based on the fact that we are humans, we have a lot of just natural intellect that occurs with that, whether we are documenting them in a way that is communicable to everyone, or whether we are documenting it in a very sort of local language that is within a small community. The fundamental is that that knowledge sits with us in our everyday life. Terminologies are great, indicators are great, they have a role to play, we need that, but let's not forget the root of it. The root of it is that this sits with our culture, our practices, and the way we used to live and the way we still live now. Thank you.
Such wonderful framing and a beautiful example of how lived experience is sometimes called into question when you don't know the originator, the author, the peer-reviewed study, but is no less legitimate and in fact can fuel a quest, an academic quest. So thank you so much, Josh, for giving us a dose of realism about what the balance and the tension means. Mete, let's turn to you. So I have a first question, which is, what do you mean when you use the term local or indigenous knowledge? What is your definition, and what is indigenous knowledge in juxtaposition with?
Thank you. First of all, I have to say that I'm not an indigenous woman, but I work with indigenous women in my country and in all over Central America and Latin America. And I have to say that indigenous and Garifuna women that we are working with are always very concerned and very related to biodiversity. I mean, like they have a clear understanding of what means to preserve ecosystems and what means to also working in agreement, I mean, with the traditional knowledge. But I want just to go right now to 2 years ago, COVID-19, because I think COVID-19 was very important in one way to recognize the traditional knowledge in a lot of communities in our world. Because I want to ask in this room, how many of us were cultivating tomatoes in our gardens, were doing ancestral things, I mean, like, because we were, I mean, like in a lockdown and we were isolated. Well, the most of the indigenous women are isolated. And I want to say that with the women I work with, they are really very resilient women. They have been working in different areas of farming, organic programs and processes using traditional knowledge and traditional understanding of different things. And I want here to relate food systems that before COVID-19, we were always talking about food security, but then we understood different things about all these areas. And I want to link to care systems, because right now care is the big discover after, we were talking about the pandemic and where care is going to be the Global Alliance for Care and everything. So I just want to say that indigenous communities have always been keeping the care systems in their cultures. And I want to say also that, for example, there's maybe a traditional knowledge that we said how they are doing advocacy. Because in one way, I have to say how much I learned from the indigenous women I work with about advocacy processes to influence to the local authorities and also to preserve their own systems. Because we see that women, especially grassroots women leaders we work with in White Commission, in fact, I'm working in a national organization linked to the White Commission, and we work regionally in Latin America, but my colleague Doreen will also talk about what they are doing in Africa. But I have to say that women have been always building systems that link culture, climate, and DRR management. This is about, that we are not discovering something new, and how they have been, dealing with different areas of traditional and ancestral practices for farming, yes, in fact, and how we were able to transfer these practices to technical institutions right now in Latin America, in Guatemala. We are partnering very clear with the private institute on climate change that is really related to improved technologies for harvesting, and they are now partnering with some of our leaders to be in the training teams, because they said, oh my goodness, we need to understand so many about this traditional knowledge. So we are working, for example, in how to preserve the native seeds. About, all these chains of different industry and agro-industry, and how we are transferring these native seeds in the banks, in the seeds banks, to different organizations, and how grassroots women leaders, indigenous women, were able to provide meals to the community during the lockdown. That's something we need to rescue and recover from that moment. That they were not, in one way they were in anticipation of what was going to be a lockdown that the world was going through. They were also able to, and this is something that the scientific areas and people in my country are very, interested, because, for example, in the Caribbean coast of Central America, we used to have Garifuna women, the casabe. And then when the big industry were discovering that cassava can remain with the same nutrients and the properties for 4 years, they were saying, oh my goodness, this is something we need to prove and to support how to do the, the going to the market or whatever. And cassava was preserving communities during hurricanes. For example, during Hurricane Mitch, it was hitting Honduras, most of the communities that were very affected remained isolated for 3 months, because there was no way to arrive there, or there was, no bridges, there was no way to put some airplanes, whatever, and they were remaining with cassava. And then that was something that the Equatorial Prize was saying, oh my goodness, this is something, an innovation we want to preserve. But I also want to talk about an experience we have in Guatemala about what it means to go through the process of community, community building for resilience or whatever, because when we were approaching to one of the most affected communities because of the civil war in my country, we discovered that women were, producing some kind of meals for themselves, but there was something missing in the process and missing in their lives, and was because they were losing their ancestral clothing, and they were deciding to go in a process of designing this ancestral clothing because they were thinking that they missed everything in their culture and in the traditional opportunities and progress. So they were doing this traditional and ancestral clothing that are very expensive in one way because they were born during the war. Soldiers came and burned all these traditions. So, and then when I was speaking to someone from the agro-export process in Guatemala, he was asking me about, do you think these women can produce like probably 300 of these traditional clothing in 1 month? And I said, oh, come on. They use their time, they invest their time building culture in this traditional clothing. So it's not something very cool, very, like a product that you can be doing a lot of commerce or whatever. So they were able to use some kind of the how do you say, hilos? How do you say this, the hilos? Steve, hilos? Threads, yes. Sorry. They were able to use some of this to create some much more simple clothing, and they were selling this, and with the income of these sellings, they were keeping farming. But this is some way that you can see that how they can manage, like traditional knowledge, and also not only doing something on the soil, doing also in the spirit and the culture to go through. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I love that story because it really speaks to the work that indigenous communities have to exert to reestablish that connection at times to knowledge that has been suppressed or taken, and with that knowledge, the resilience that comes with it. So thank you for that. Let's go to Claudia from IFPRI. So coming from such a world-class research institution within the CG, how for you within the CG is knowledge validated, and what counts as evidence?
That's a very good question, and it really depends on, I guess, the kind of research question we are trying to answer. So as you said, we are the largest agricultural research for development network focused on food insecure populations. So we do some so-called randomized control trial if we focus on introducing a new food, a new crop variety. An example a couple of years ago is iron fortified rice. So it's a biofortified crop. So, but obviously we don't know if this fortified crop improves nutrition, improves iron in women. And colleagues, I think from Cornell University, did an RCT with religious sisters in the Philippines, a very captured audience. It was very easy to control their food intake. They volunteered, and the research was able to show that iron content improved. And so then you can start to do more trials and actually put varieties in the field that make a difference in humans' lives and especially human nutrition. So I myself, I lead the natural resource management team at the International Food Policy Research Institute, and we generally have far too many variables out in our fields to be able to use an RCT approach, because that generally focuses on a single variable that you want to control for. In general, we use qualitative approaches, quantitative approaches. We combine biology, hydrology, agronomy, sociology, economists. So we have all of that in our group focusing on natural resource management. We don't believe in a dichotomy between indigenous traditional knowledge and modern knowledge. All forms of knowledge have to be brought together, especially in today's overlapping crisis, because we absolutely would not be able to make a difference otherwise. We work with a lot of grassroots women's organizations, and while they draw on traditional knowledge, similar to what we have heard, they also ask us actually to assess their impact. So if you are a member of this organization, do the women have higher agency? Are they more empowered compared to women who are not part of these groups, for example? They also ask us for modern or advanced innovations. I work a lot on water resources myself, and just this week, we also work with Roots Kenya, and they told me this week, we absolutely cannot handle the severity of the drought in Kenya with our traditional water harvesting support, and so they asked me to link them to solar irrigation technology providers who can then hopefully, help their women members to access solar technologies that is not a traditional technology, but they obviously are interested to combine traditional with modern technologies. Staying in the water field, so traditionally surface water has been used for agriculture water management, for irrigation. There's a lot of local rules, a lot of local knowledge, but with the advent of individualized pump technologies in the 1970s with Japan, India, then China, developed those pumps. So now a lot of farmers are actually able to pump groundwater, and it has been a dramatic change and a dramatic shift from surface irrigation to individualized groundwater irrigation. So we do a lot of work on trying to improve governance and institutions for groundwater, and communities generally do not have a lot of rules in place. There's not a lot of knowledge. So we are trying to support developing some mental models on how to improve groundwater governance. So again, it's an area where traditional indigenous knowledge has not been generated. We also notice that overall, with increased population pressure, climate change, civil conflict and strife, a lot of indigenous knowledge is not holding anymore, and we need to focus in these areas to combine traditional with modern knowledge. And maybe quickly, how can we make a difference? How can we strengthen those two areas yet further? I believe we need a growing voice of local communities. I mean, everyone here talks about justice, climate justice, water justice, food justice, and that can only be done if local voices and local groups are elevated. And so that's definitely an area we also work on. We need everyone working in this space needs to focus on outcomes and on sustainability. And again, if we focus on outcomes and on sustainability, it's only possible if we combine various sources of knowledge. And just maybe at the end, because it's RCT, can you do a randomized control test and control trial of indigenous knowledge? Yes, you can. A colleague of mine has done an RCT to assess if just capacity building of developing local solutions to farmer-voiced problems rather than introducing external technologies, if it makes a difference. And yes, it does. So it's an indigenous knowledge you can also combine with an RCT. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Claudia. We're going to go to Doreen. Doreen, many believe that local and indigenous knowledge has such an important role in preserving cultural identity, cultural heritage, but real scalable solutions require science and technology. What is your view on that idea?
Thank you very much. I'll start by saying a short story about myself. I'm Doreen from Kenya. I live in the rural part of Western Kenya. I'm one person who knew the value of education at a very early age, but didn't have the opportunity of going through my education because I became a mother at the age of 18 years. So after getting my child just immediately after high school, I was a rural girl in the village staying with my mother. And so I decided to be keeping myself busy because now that I had dropped out of school, the only role I had was taking care of my young baby and then relax throughout the day. So I could wake up in the morning, clean my mother's cow shed, clean my mother's poultry unit, and then when I carry the refuse, I pour in the farm. Little did I know that I was playing an important role in that home that no one had assigned me to. So during the long dry spells, I could see my mother late in the evening going to the farm where I used to pour the cow dung and poultry refuse, and then she gets wild vegetables that have just grown in that part. So I started asking my mother, why is it that this is during the dry season And you can find some wild vegetables in places where I've been pouring the cow refuse and poultry refuse. So she started telling me that, the other part of the farm, we use the modern fertilizer. And the modern fertilizer usually makes our farm very dry. But the animal refuse and poultry refuse, which we refer as to manure, makes our soil soft and cool. And that's why we can be able to get we are able to collect wild vegetables even during the long dry spell. So I continued doing that. I collected wild seeds from our indigenous trees and then making seed beds. Even as I speak, if you visit my home now, my ancestral home, you can get very cool sheds, things that I did over 20 years ago. So as I grew up now, I started having the knowledge that if I do this, it will help us in climate change. But no, now when I was doing that, I didn't know anything about climate change. I was just doing out of... So now back to talking about indigenous knowledge and climate change. I've grown up now knowing that there are some seeds which are able to be sustained even during the harsh realities of very long drought. Like we have now our traditional maize seed back home in Kenya. We have a seed that my grandmother used after harvesting. She used to select some of the maize seeds and then store them in a tight bag, old bag or small sack, and then hangs it at the fireplace. Now that main seed could be there maybe for 3 months or 6 months. And then during the onset of rains during the planting season, my grandmother takes that seed, uses the manure that I had learned earlier that now manure makes our soils moist and soft even during the harsh season, and then plants it. Immediately after 3 months or 4 months, we used to have ready green maize in our home, unlike other homes where they used to buy certified maize seed from the local shops to plant. Now, I've grown up knowing that we have that maize seed, we have the fertilizer, we have the manure that helps the maize seed mature faster and is able to sustain the harsh realities of prolonged drought, no sun, and even when we have the onset of rains. At times in Kenya we have rains, and during the onset of rains, the rains are so heavy in that you find that most of the crops are being washed away. But we have some indigenous seeds, like now the maize seed, the traditional maize seed. Even when it's washed away, after the rains have started capsizing, you find that now the maize seed has also woken up and it's growing. Unlike the certified maize seed, after being washed away, you cannot recover anything from that piece of land. And then we have the manure. We have now started working with the county government in our areas, and now they are using a way of storing this manure. As grassroots women, we just collect the manure, store the manure, mix it with the animal manure, bird manure, and the wasted leaves. We mix them after rotting, we store the manure under a shed, and then during the planting season, we use the manure for our grassroots women use the manure for planting our local vegetables and our local maize. But now the county government has found a way in the modern technology. They use the manure and have found a way of storing the manure in a more secure way. Now that when they put it on the shelves in their shops, they sell it as organic fertilizer. But initially, it's the manure that we grassroots women have been using since the past. We also have some worms. We have some worms that stay in our rotten manure, and then there is a fluid that they produce. If you collect that fluid, you can use it for top dressing of our maize crops and our local vegetables. But now the modern technology has now entered into our working systems, and they are now storing that fluid as liquid fertilizer. When you go to the shop stores, or in the agrovets, you buy it as liquid fertilizer, and yet it's the liquid that is produced by some worms that are found in our manure that we store. Throughout the process, grassroots men now have come with different initiatives that when we partner with the county government and the national government, they're using this technology, at least in a more better way. And you appreciate it because, like us, we don't have the money to do in more advanced ways. But when we partner with them, at least they expand it and the knowledge can be used even in more vast areas, like when we, the grassroots women, just use it in our local communities. As a grassroots women organization, we have now started a climate information center. This is a one-stop shop whereby our grassroots women and even our county government and even communities far away from us come there for peer exchange. And when you go to this climate center, you find variety of seeds that you can use during the dry spell, during the wet spell. We also have technologies whereby there is this water harvesting that can be used for irrigative agriculture. Our grassroots women just dig holes, and then we have a certain type of soil. If you mix with water and make clay, you smear the walls of the dug holes and store this water that can be used for irrigation during the dry spells. But now when you come in with modern technology, the agricultural research centers are now able to collect the water and store into huge water tanks, or even dig deep wells and cement the walls of the well so that they can collect more water that it can be used for irrigation in future. We can talk a lot, but I know I only had 5 minutes, and during side events and other meetings, we can talk more about the work we do in the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doreen. We're going to go to one of our virtual experts here, Deepak from IDE Global. Would love to get your view on this big question we're gnawing on, which is indigenous knowledge in tension with modern scientific knowledge? Over to you.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for that, and what a privilege to be here today. Before I begin that, I saw an interesting news this morning that one of the winners of the Local Adaptation Champions Award at the summit, which I'm missing out today, is an innovative community-centric safe water initiative from the remote hills of Bangladesh. So that was quite an amazing way for me to wake up this morning. So congratulations to the winner. And also it serves as an interesting opening for this conversation as a reminder that locally led indigenous knowledge-based solutions can often be, not often, but in most cases are impactful, sustainable, and cost-effective. And therefore, based on your earlier question, are they important and integral? Of course they are. They should be part of our repository of knowledge and practices, particularly in our race to resilience, as it's rightly called, because I don't think we have the time nor the luxury of being too picky and choosy here. I think it's utmost importance to have all the knowledge, all the lessons, all the ideas and innovation to help us get there. But this conversation was an interesting eye-opener for myself, Sarah, because as the other speakers before me very articulately pointed out, there are some major hurdles in why it is not the case as is often we think it should be. Oftentimes achieving scale from locally led innovation and practices are difficult, as most often these solutions are based on local context, culture, values, and resources. Receiving scientific validity and acknowledgement is often challenging, as most of these solutions are codified in local languages with limited reach and access. And of course, above all, mechanism for scaling these adoptions, whether through private or public mechanisms, are often also not fully capable of supporting these ideas. So, in our work of scaling technologies at IDE, we often see that the misperception is that local knowledge and indigenous practices are often associated with being old, conservative, or inferior, while modern and scientific knowledge are often associated with being superior. So there's really a stigma and a perception that needs to be changed. And at IDE, Sarah, we've been working for the last 40 years on designing and scaling technologies in agriculture, food, nutrition, the whole water, sanitation, hygiene spaces. And with of course, the objective being helping bring positive changes and impact on the communities that we work in, and above all, in partnership in co-designing these solutions with the communities. So to share our lesson and experience, and I'll keep it very brief and short here because I know time is of the essence. In doing so, our challenge has been to work in two very interrelated themes on what you said. This is it dichotomous? Is it the other side of the coin? For us, it's the first one of designing and commercializing these technologies is developing a context-specific solution that is desirable amongst the users in terms of how it fits into their culture, habits, and values. In short, a solution that has what we call the stickiness factor. It sticks in terms of its adoption. And the second challenge has been to understand how to make these sticky solutions available and affordable to a large number of consumers through market mechanisms that are sustainable and accessible. So it's taking these really interesting local knowledge, but also using mechanisms that can bring that knowledge to a wider audience, that can make it affordable and make use of that knowledge beyond just the local culture that it's appropriate in. And in doing so, Sarah, our lessons have been many, but the one thing I think I should emphasize here is that the experience that we have, and that's relevant for today's discussion, is that we need to have a very radical reflection on what we mean by and how we define change, because change is what we're after. And going back to what our first speaker, Joshua, said earlier, the current focus on the parameters of how we define development terminologies such as impact, sustainability, value for money, and return on investment needs to be grounded by asking ourselves, what does it mean to empower people to change their lives on their own terms, giving prominence to the voices that should matter the most. And as soon as we start going down this path with an emphasis on the phrase and the ideology of people changing their lives on their own term, I think we start having and considering what is important to those who should lead that change, and we de-emphasize our external definition of that change. And it's not easy to do, and we need to let go of our current way of thinking. But I think that it's a powerful way to look at a systemic transformation on how indigenous knowledge and locally led initiatives can be recognized for what they are and open our own horizon. Very much in line with what you said, Sarah, at the beginning of the session. It is about where you stand, and more importantly, it's about where you choose to stand and what perspective you choose to use and bring to the table. So I think that's where I'll stop here. There's so much to talk about. What an amazing topic, but I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. So wonderful. Yes, round of applause. I love that you named the stigma that needs to change and challenged all of us to think about the reframe around agency and power and empowerment to invite people to define the outcomes which they are pursuing through knowledge or the mixology of knowledges. So thank you so much for that. Nakatame, let's come to you at USAID. So how does this invisible divide between organizations, and we've heard from a really nice array here, that work with local and indigenous innovation and those who work with more technocentric innovators, private sectors, how does that all manifest at USAID? And should donors fund innovations that stem from traditional knowledge? And if so, what has USAID done so far, and what are its plans for the future?
Thanks a lot. It's really a loaded question. All right. First of all, my name is Nikodem Chamu. I work with USAID in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we have a very, very huge program working with indigenous people and local communities. So to go back to your question, we as USAID, our focus is on the issue of local community on the ground. We don't care about which partner, private sector or public sector. We focus on how to address the issue on the ground. We also know that by working with a range of partners, each of them brings its own expertise on the table. Let me tell you, right now, the public funding is like 7 billion shortage. And if we don't go through the private sector, it's going to be very, very difficult for us to resolve some of the challenges and issues that we face on the ground. And some prediction are even saying that by 2030, that funding gap will be like a $340 billion. So, just to say that tapping into private sector funding is an opportunity for us to really lift out our effort to resolve issues on the ground. So, there is also at the community level, it is very, very critical and very, very important to tap into local knowledge to really be able to achieve what we want to achieve on the ground. And here, I'm going to give you a concrete example. We went to, since US government and other donors they decided to pull together this pledge at Glasgow in last year, $1.7 billion. So we decided that now we're going to really engage with young people to really commit ourselves to do something and show how we are moving towards implementing the pledge. So we really engage with indigenous people in the eastern part of DRC. This is the Tanganyika province, Kalemi village. There you have a huge population of indigenous people. And we were really discussing with them because we were in the process of co-creation. So we're discussing with them what are their own priorities, what are the issues that they are facing in their own words. And I was so amazed. I was expecting them to tell us that, oh, we don't have hospital, we don't have school, we don't have this. No. They came to us and said, look, we are living along the Tanganyika lake. Now, the winds that come from the Tanganyika lake blows very heavily and most of the time destroy our houses. That's one. Second, we are facing the issue of flood here now. In the past, we didn't face that. And I said, oh, okay. So maybe we should think about bringing an engineer to build a wall, And then they look at me and they say, no, and no. If you build the wall, you have killed us. Because the wind that blows there is one that we breathe. So we will teach you on how to resolve the problem. We know the solution. It's just that we lack the momentum. And I said, okay, what's the solution? Oh, we have a database, a botanical database of all the species that were here before, and people have destroyed it to produce charcoal for cooking. So we can rebuild the nature. We can repeat the nature. We have all the name of all the species, a full database of all the species that were here. Some of them even went far back, showing me the density. They said that this particular, it was dense here, and this particular species was dense here. And I went back, scratching my head, saying, Jesus, okay, how to go about it? They say, no, let's work together. We will identify all those species for you. And we will work together to germinate or to use all the techniques that you can bring, like vegetation propagation, to help us. And right now, as we stand, we have 4,500 seedlings in the nursery that we have developed with local communities, and it's ready now to go ahead. They're ready to go ahead and plant along the Tanganyika Lake to use it as a windbreak. Not only windbreak, but also food, because in there are so many, fruit tree species, indigenous fruit tree species that they have identified, and then also medicinal plants, and even cultural species, because they say that in their village before, those trees, if they had problems with communities, they will go under those trees, make a judgment, and each of them would hit the tree, and that will be, nobody will come back again with the problem. So just to enlighten the fact that most of the time we always think technology, high technology, but if you move down to local community, they will teach you soft way of not only addressing the climate change, but also their resilience to climate change. Okay, that was one. Second, again, another result that came out from that co-creation, which I wasn't expecting. They came to us and they said, look, you guys, you went to school and you can codify everything you have, using, but we are here, we want to do the same thing. We want to codify our local knowledge. So we want to go to school and then learn and then codify our local knowledge. And they say, look, University of Kalemi is here. We don't have money to go there. Oh my goodness. So we decided through that co-creation to build a component of scholarship. We put 10 scholarships in there, and right now, as we speak, there are seven indigenous people at the University of Kalemi studying law and agronomy. So please don't think for them. Bring them what they need. Don't think for them. They have the local knowledge and they have used it for ages. Last story, I was surprised the other day because I sat in the meeting with the special envoy for climate change, John Kerry, and then the administrator of USAID, Samantha, with indigenous people. And then one of them told the special envoy, I am not here to learn. I'm here to teach you. You are talking about climate change. I have a database moving from ancestor to descendant for 50 years of climate change database. If you have time, I can share with you. It was really amazing. Thanks so much.
Really appreciate that example of listening to community and being open to the unexpected when looking for solutions. We are coming up on our last 5 minutes, so I actually want to pass it to my co-facilitator, Senior Adaptation and Resilience Advisor at WRI, Christina. Do you want to frame a question and then offer us your sort of synthesis remarks based on what you've heard today?
Sure, it's a real pleasure to be here with you today. And I guess just in the interest of time, maybe one quick question for whoever wants to jump in and respond to this. But what needs to change in our innovation systems now in order to enable the marriage of these different knowledge systems that we've been talking about? So if you could change one thing, or probably won't be one thing, but a couple of things, what would it be? And I'd ask for comments to be really brief. Any takers on that?
I think we have to change partnerships right now, because it's not about only taking advantage of what means traditional knowledge, means what is going to be like I gain, you gain, about using these kind of programs, processes, because humanity will gain, in this sense. For example, very quick example, we have a seeds festival taking place every year in my country. So in this case, we are trying to bring seeds, native seeds from the coastal area to the highlands, from the highlands to the south coast. So in this kind of programs and processes, again, very important research institutes in my country, the university, the technological university, is trying to link with us because they are so amazed about what grassroots women leaders, indigenous leaders were starting to do by themselves. And they were just saying, we are eating what you were, were exchanging with us in the coastal area, Caribbean area, in highlands. So I think it's about change dynamics in partnerships for that.
Fantastic.
Great.
Deepak, really briefly, thank you, Maite, for that response.
Absolutely, and a great question, Christina. And just to build on what the gentleman from USAID said, I think for me, the biggest learning here would be, the one thing I could change would be, we need to be willing to put our ego aside and listen more and talk less, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm not going to try and capture everything that was, or summarize everything that was said in this really rich discussion, which I'm truly honored to be a part of today. But I think what really jumped out at me was, we asked very profound questions about whose knowledge counts, who benefits from that knowledge. Often we see very extractive knowledge systems, but we also heard about the disconnect between the classroom, from Joshua, the classroom and the field. We also heard some amazing solutions out there to help deal with drought, to help deal with too much water and water harvesting. And I think what was interesting about the solutions that we heard is that they tended to be very circular, very integrated, and not the kind of single solution paradigm that so much of our innovation systems, as Claudia mentioned, with our CTs, we focus on one variable, just as for many years we have focused on production rather than nutrition, rather than ecosystem health, et cetera. And so the solutions that are coming up tend to be more integrated. And then they're more localized and reinforcing, as Maite said, of care systems, of culture. And that's so important as we saw the need for more locally led solutions, more locally reinforcing local determination, local power, local knowledge. But we also heard that past is not prologue. We're heading into a situation that we've never been in before, feeding 9 billion in light of the climate change that is already in the system and continuing to accumulate unless we take urgent action. And so we need a marriage of different kinds of knowledge, new ways of continuing to develop and advance that knowledge. And I think that that has a real importance for a lot of important initiatives, like the Regen 10 initiative that was just launched last week at COP, or the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate that seeks to mobilize, I think, upwards around 8 billion for innovation of climate-related solutions in agriculture, or even the discussions on the future of the Coronibia dialogue on agriculture, which is taking place just meters away from where you're sitting, those of you that are in the Resilience Hub, and the amplitude that work program will take going forward. So I think there's no time to waste, as Deepak reminded us. But also the one word that I would say that sticks in my mind from this conversation today is respect. Respecting knowledge, respecting cultures, respecting tradition, but also respecting the challenge that we have at hand, and the need for continued innovation and development of solutions and taking them to scale, which is not at all contrary or in conflict with the local leadership. So with that, I know we have just 1 minute to conclude. I'd really like to thank partners in developing this session, IDE, the Huayru Commission, Rockefeller Foundation, our partners at the Resilience Hub and the Global Resilience Partnership, and of course, all of our fantastic speakers for being here today, and those of you in the audience for listening in. So thank you so much. And Sarah, final word from you.
I love respect. That's exactly it. Respect, changing our egos changing our partnerships. I think you gave us the call to action. Let's spread it. Let's take it out of this room and out of this screen and make it happen. Thank you, everyone, for your time.